Hi, this is a giant beat video that I'm going to make. I just want to make sure my cymbals are... Okay. This is a video I'm making to show... I have here, this is an original Paiste Giant Beat, probably from 1969 or whatever. They were introduced, remember, in 67, and then in and around 71, around the time they brought in the 2002s, Paiste always said, or at least you read, that they stopped making the Giant Beats in that time, but I've seen... I went to a pair of hi-hats years ago, a 15-inch pair, that had a serial number beginning with 3, which was from 73. It's funny, I'm making this video today. I actually tried making it earlier this morning, but I just went on yapping for too long. But in any case, there's a fella who's on a Giant Beat quest. He reminds me of a buddy of mine, Bob, who's a big Giant Beat guy. And anyway, he just sent me actually some pictures tonight of... I think there's a pair on German eBay of 15-inch Giant Beat hats with the serial number that begins with 3. And he or somebody else, I can't remember if his name's Mike or another fella, sent me pictures recently of an 18 and a 24 that actually had serial numbers beginning with 4, so they're from 74. In any case, bear with me just for a quick sec. In any case, the Giant Beats, as you can see here, the original Giant Beats had a white inking at the 9 o'clock, this was a clock, and then they're stamping, the embossed stamp, because up until about 1980-81, Paiste embossed all their cymbals. So you see sort of a white inking here. It's sort of faded here. As they got faded, if you even rubbed them or, it's definitely cleaned them, this would sort of disappear, which would just leave you with this here. So a lot of people, including myself, years and years ago, came across Giant Beats without realizing they were Giant Beats, because it doesn't say in the stamp. That stamp sort of resembles, of course, the Ludwig Standard, the later Ludwig Standard logo, and of course the Formula 602 logo. It's similar, but you'll just notice on here it says trademark Paiste made in Switzerland. That's the Giant Beat logo, which of course they used later. They changed a little bit toward the end of the Giant Beats, which more or less probably corresponded with the black label Giant Beats, which came in about 70 or 71. The word Paiste here actually then was sort of moved on a different stamp they made. Paiste occurs up here, so it'll say Paiste up here, otherwise it'll look the same. So a golden rule is, if you ever see a cymbal that looks like this with tight lathing, if you see a Paiste stamp at the 3 o'clock, it's a Giant Beat. The Giant Beat was the only cymbal line that they embossed stamped at the 3 o'clock position. And again, so until about 1970 or so, from 67 to about 70 or 71, the Giant Beat logo was here in white ink, but it faded easily. And then they moved the logo up here, like you'd see on their modern reissues, which I have here, which I'll play in a minute. And then they did that, of course, till 74 or 70 or whenever they stopped really absolutely making the Giant Beat. But anyway, you'll notice here's a physical attribute. I'm trying to be very online about this because I very easily, when I made the 10-hour video earlier this morning, I just rambled and rambled. So original Giant Beats, the difference is you'll notice that if you can see here, the bell is much bigger and domier than on a reissue Giant Beat. The bells on these are very similar. Paiste 505, I noticed, and of course 602 have similar bells than this, or similar bells to this. And then here is the reissue Giant Beat I just got in. I got a great price on it. Some of the places are blowing these things out, really cheap. So this is the reissue I got, which is indicative of any reissue you've got. You can see here on the reissues, this is Paiste Giant Beat. Now the black label, the original black label, 71 and 74 apparently at least, had the logo very similar to this, although it wasn't sort of done so cleanly here. It was more stamped on, as was the older stuff. There's no serial here anymore because what Paiste does, if you're not familiar with it, is they actually laser engrave the bottom. This is Paiste, handmade in Switzerland, and the serial number's there. Of course, here's the logo on the underside. So modern Giant Beat, and then here's original Giant Beat. Now one thing I notice about the Giant Beats, this is sort of Giant Beat geeky, is that you'll notice on, and I see it sometimes on the 2002s, and this is going to be funny, I don't mean it to, but I call it nipple hammering, meaning that normally on Paiste cymbals you'll see, you'll see the hammer marks, but they're normally just nice, smooth, circular shapes, indentations. But on original Giant Beats, and I noticed they do it here on the reissues too, you'll see there's sort of a, what I call it looks like, it looks sort of like a nipple. I guess you notice it less on this one. But in the very center of these hammer marks, you'll see what almost looks like a little, it almost looks like a slight, very slight mark coming back out. So it's almost like a, well, if you're looking at a two-dimensional picture of a woman's breast, I mean, anyway, that's what I notice about the Giant Beat hammering on the originals, and then of course here on the reissues. And I have, since they've reissued these, I have noticed the same hammering on some 2002s. And I don't know if it's intentional, or I'm sure it's intentional in some ways, but maybe sometimes they just, I don't know if it's the same machine, or if they use a slightly different head, or I have seen some thin crashes, 2002 thin crashes with the same hammering. Anyway, that aside. Bell on an original, see that bell? Very indicative of what you'd see on a 22 or a 24-inch 2002. Once they get up to that size, they have a bigger bell. Although this one's a little flatter. This is actually very much the shape of a 602 bell on a bigger cymbal. And of course, on the 505s, which are kind of my favorite Paiste line, especially a 505 18-inch crash or 20-inch crash or 20-inch medium, the bells are bigger. They're a larger shape than you'll find on a 2002, by the way. But anyway, so you see the bell here. See the sort of classic 602 sort of shape. Bigger this way, and then sort of more domier, a couple inflection points. And then here's the reissue. And you'll notice the bell isn't, it's not quite as big. Now, I seem to remember taking, my friend Bob, I turned him on to Giant Beats years ago, in the mid-90s, when he first started kind of buying cymbals off me and stuff. And since then, I sort of, showed him a Giant Beat once or twice way back in the day, and sort of explained to him, that the stamp and stuff is at the 3 o'clock. And he went out and bought tons of them on eBay and at shops. And as I've said in other videos, so many of those cymbals actually came through here at my house. Again, here's the bell. As I talk, the bell. Here's the reissue. And then compare that, via the rewind button or whatever. And there's the original. Of course, too, real fast, original Giant Beats had more of that cool patina that they did a good job at emulating, but the reissue patina is a little more green than brown. The original was more brown. And that doesn't matter. I'm not one of those Paiste geeks that's like, well, you didn't quite nail it because of the green patina. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some sonic differences here. How you coming, Mickles? All right. It's my daughter up there. God bless her. All right. So we have the reissue here on the left. I got to check this camera too, make sure everything's in the shot. And then the original on the right. So the original, 20-inch, reissue. Let me just check this camera. Bear with me. Alrighty. Bloop. There we go. All right. So here's the pitch. So here's the original. Okay, original Giant Beat, probably 1969, white label. Versus reissue. Now, the coolest thing about the Giant Beat that I always used to love is that the sustain went on forever. And I always just assumed that it, of course, has to do with, I think, the lathing being so tight. I thought maybe it might have had something to do with the bell shape, too, maybe being a little bigger. But I noticed that the sustain goes on, they really mimicked, the reissues really had the sustain, too. In general, like I said in other videos, I actually do, as a general rule, personally prefer the reissues to the originals, at least the originals I've seen and played. And I probably played, or had here, maybe 4 24s, maybe 7 or 8 20s, and maybe about 6 or 7 18s. I forgot, but it's been over the course I've only kind of been, actually found physical specimens of Giant Beats besides the hat starting in about the mid-90s. But in any case, again, as a general rule, in my opinion, I do prefer the reissue Giant Beats. Now here they sound different. You'll hear this one's a little higher pitched. Because this Giant Beat, the original, is heavier than this reissue. Now, Paiste is known for their consistency across the board. Like I said, I once had a pair of Formula 602 15-inch sound edge hats that were probably some of the first they ever made. They just had patent pending on the bottom and the top and the underside. the bottom cymbal had like 50 ripples. The original Giant Beat, or Sound Edge hats had tons of ripples, the sound waves. And when I got the pair, the bottom was great, the top had a couple cracks, and I got it from Jim Strike up in Palatine. God love him, at the drum pad. So I ordered, this was probably in 92 or 3 when they were totally winded down, the 602s. Paiste had, I think at the time, the woman I talked to there, the person I talked to there said I think they had 2 left. What I did was I bought a couple pairs of hi-hats, a medium top, but I also bought a Sound Edge top, a 15-inch Sound Edge top, which I think was the second to last or the last that they had in Brea. Of course, you can't buy that stuff directly through Paiste. At the time, it was before Music Interstate and all this stuff. Back in the early 90s, I was buying stuff through a place that was pretty cheap called Thoroughbred Music. So I went through Thoroughbred, they got them, they brought them, you know, Thoroughbred, I don't know if they drop shipped them to me or whatever. But of course, I feel I should have bought both Sound Edge tops. Anyway, the replacement top they brought me was identical in pitch and everything to the one from '67. So, like I said, a 1967 Formula 602 15-inch Sound Edge pair with the cracked top. The replacement I got, Blue Label, 1992. So it was identical. So the point I'm getting at is that Paiste, of course, is a big consistency thing. But the only time I've ever noticed a consistency thing, just as applies to the Giant Beats. From my experience that I've had, seeing, you know, the 20 or so, I don't know, 15, 16, including hi-hats, maybe 17 cymbals, if you want to call the hi-hat pair one cymbal, that I've seen. In the 18s and the 20s, I've noticed a weight differential. Sometimes I would guess, because I didn't have a digital scale at the time, probably up to 200 grams, I would guess, weight differential between some of the 20s that we had come through here. Again, my friend Bob lived in a bad neighborhood, so we had the stuff shipped here. So I used to open the box, and he wouldn't mind. I'd open it up, I'd take it, and I'd tap on it, and I'd play it and check them out. But I didn't weigh them. But from my experience, I would say that some of the 20-inch Giant Beats we got through here, and 18s, you'd say, were probably on the order of the differential between being like, the thinner ones would be like a current thin crash, like an 18-inch 2002 thin crash, a current one, and then a heavier one would be like an 18-inch 2002 crash. They don't make the 20-inch. I think they discontinued the 20-inch thin crashes, but I would guess it would be about the same. If you had a few years ago 20-inch thin crash versus a modern 20-inch 2002 regular crash, that would sort of be the range of weights that I personally experienced with the original Giant Beats. They weren't all like, from my experience with the reissues, the ones I've seen in stores and this one and other ones people have had, you know, the weights per size are, I think, very tight. You know, Paiste's famous for their consistency and stuff. And but I don't know if they did that on purpose back in, you know, the late 60s, early 70s, or just because maybe it was a new cymbal line. You know, rock and roll was big, and it was sort of really their first real foray into B8. I mean, they had the Cymbals, like the Cymbal 65s and such, which were B8 alloy. But so maybe they didn't put so much an emphasis on the weight entirely, like crazy, like their normal specification. In any case, let's stop yapping about the cymbals, and I'll start playing them. So anyway, again, this one's a little heavier than this one. So the tone differential has to do really with the weight. By and large, they really sound sonically to me almost pretty much identical, apart from the weight differential. So we have okay, original 20-inch white label Giant Beat, reissue. Now, I don't know if that evil microphone on my camera picks it up. Paiste B8 cymbals. I never noticed it on other I didn't play a lot of other B8 cymbals like Zildjian or Sabian ever made, but there's a certain, seems to be like a frequency when you play B8 cymbals, especially the 2002s over the years from my experience. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but back in the day, before everybody had cell phones, and I don't mean for that to sound patronizing, but really back in the day when everyone was locked into landlines, most people had phones that were attached to the wall, or, you know, in their bedroom or their living room or whatever, that were supplied by the phone company. I think one of the arms of the phone company was Western Electric, and that was their whole gig, making these phones. Anyway, you could buy them, but I think you could rent them too. Like you paid the phone company $1 a month or whatever for the phone. Those phones had 2 bells in them, and they had, it was a very familiar ring to most people older, probably older than 30. And in fact, now on some iPads or some iPhones, there's a simulated ring. You'll hear a lot of people now with iPhones, and they goes like that. Well, that's a recording. That's a sample of the original sound. What I'm getting at is in B8 cymbals, especially 18s and 20s, bigger cymbals that you crash, you'll hear an overtone, like it's a good overtone though. It's real high, like, and it's pretty much the exact pitch of those bells, those Western Electric bells. And I can't tell you, when I got my first brand new Paistes, when I got 1990, I got an 18-inch, or 1990 or 1991, I got an 18-inch crash and a 20-inch crash, brand new, from DJ's in Berwyn. Had them special order. And when I used to play them, for the first couple days, I'd stop because I thought the phone was ringing. And I'd be like, oh, is the phone ringing? Is the phone ringing? And it finally dawned on me that it was the cymbals generating this sound that was... You know, I thought dogs would be barking outside, you know. Anyway, so that's an interesting aside. So here they are again. So what I'm going to do is let me do the finger tap here. That's the original, late 60s white label Giant Beat 20-inch, and here's the reissue. Okay. Again, so here's the general crash, original, reissue. Again, in this, you know, I would prefer if this reissue was about the weight of this, a little heavier, which is an interesting thing I'm going to point out in a minute. But I prefer, in my opinion, the reissues generally, I would say, to me, definitely sound better. Definitely the hats. The 15-inch original Giant Beats that I owned, I had 2 pairs, one of which was a black label. And my friend Bob had a couple come through here. I always thought were just dogs. I mean, they just didn't sound good. They were real. They weren't really. They were like doog doog. They just had a weird clunky sound to them. Anyway, so again, here's the original. You'll notice are very similar. Even though this one's bigger, it sounds a little bigger. It has a little more of that quasi sort of Zildjian tone to it because of the nature of the big bell. When I say Zildjian tone, I actually mean because Zildjians generally, in 18-inch size and above, have massive domey bells. So here's the original bell with the beat of the stick. Reissue. Now, from where I'm sitting, the projection on the reissue is actually much better. And cleaner sounding to me. Now that could be the nature of this particular 20 of this Giant Beat. I haven't had I haven't had a lot of Giant Beats here now, probably for about 5 or 6 years. So I don't know if this is maybe a slight, relatively clunker bell. I mean, don't get me wrong. To me, this bell sounds great. I'm just saying when compared to the reissue one smokes it. Now, I think originally Paiste probably, I mean, you could say it might be true that when they reissued the Giant Beats, they made a smaller bell, maybe for that reason, maybe they felt it sounded better. But I think probably what happened is I don't know if they had the original presses. Well, I know they hammer the shape in, but supposedly, or I guess they do, but I don't know, maybe they just didn't have the original bell shape press or whatever, or the same, I don't know, mold, or I think that they maybe just did it this shape because that's what the 2002s was, is what they had on hand. But you never know. I do seem to think, though, that I did take a picture when the first reissue Giant Beat that I ever got my hands on, a 20, in 2005, like whenever it was, 2005 or 2006, I forgot, when it first came out, I took a picture of the bell, and then I took a picture of the bell of a reissue, not these particular ones. And they're on the web somewhere. I posted them on like the Cymbalholic site, and then I have them posted on some site I lost the codes to. So if you type in Giant Beat, original Giant Beat into Google, you'll probably see those pictures. You'll see a room, looks like a sun porch with an oak floor. You'll see the pictures. It looks almost like the same picture except two different symbols. You really see the bell-shaped differential in those pictures. And I can post them too if you want to see them. But what I want to say though, I wonder if they made this bell, it's possible they might have, because that was in 2005 or 2006. I wonder if this bell looks a teeny bit bigger than I remember. But I don't know. I might just be old and imagining that. But anyway, Giant Beats. I think they're fantastic. And I wanted to say, one thing I wanted to point out before, is there's a fellow at Paiste named Ed Clift, who's a wonderful guy. You know, for years I would yap the ears off the poor people out in Brea. I mean, literally, since like 1992, I'd call up and be like, hey, so you're getting rid of the 602s? Oh, wow. Hey, you got any 505s left in the vault? Hey, are any 404s left? I mean, the 404s are great. Hey, you guys really getting rid of the 602s? You know, that kind of thing. God love them for putting up with me. I had called Andrew, I think. Andrew Shreve was a nice guy, out at Paiste, probably in 2006 when they first came out. I told him that, A, I was thrilled at how good the cymbals sounded, actually, and two, how kind of dark they sounded, but like dark and bright at the same time. They have that Paiste glassy shimmer, but they're also like darker cymbals. I mean, not like Zildjian K, like dark, you know, like dusty, throaty, 10-pack a cigarette a day, like dark, but just a lower pitch, darker, with a teensy smidge of like trashiness, but not like in a super cruddy sort of way. Just, I mean, an excellent cymbal. And the only thing I felt at the time, and still feel now, and I told this to Ed Cliff too, right? I suggested it in my, of course, I have no power at all over anybody, but I said it'd probably be a good idea if I would consider the reissues that they came out with 7 years ago, to be what I would consider a thin version, and that they should maybe make a slightly heavier version. So maybe call the reissues, the current ones, medium thins, and maybe make a slightly heavier version, call them medium heavies or something. But of course they wouldn't be, you know, sometimes that connotation means, you know, like a medium thin might be a, I don't know, like a 1200 gram 18, and a medium heavy sometimes might be maybe a 1480 gram 18. I don't mean it that way, but just a little bit heavier. Maybe like the difference here. Do you know what I mean? So they sort of maybe like type 1, type 2, or medium thin, medium heavy. And Ed Clift was kind of like, all right, well, you know, I mean, those guys, they don't know me from anybody, and I could be totally wrong and cost the Paiste company tons of money. But from my opinion, from where I'm sitting, you know, the Giant Beats as they have them are great, but I think they could offer maybe a slightly heavier model. Also, too, of course, it would be great if they brought out 22s and, you know, maybe 16s for some folks, or maybe 19. You know, they don't have to go crazy, but I think they definitely should have a 22. And it is interesting, you guys, some of you folks have probably seen on YouTube or on eBay, the Drum Center of New Hampshire, I think that's what it is, drums, they got a bunch of 22s in. And I don't know if somebody there was thinking like I am, or like a lot of you guys are, like, hey, let's get some 22s, and maybe ordered 15 or 20 of them. Because they were selling them one after the other. I think I saw like at least 10 listed on eBay, or 5 anyway. Or maybe a Paiste was fooling around like, hey, you know, they did maybe make 50 of these 22s. They wanted to see how they'd sell, maybe, and maybe Drum Center of New Hampshire was one of the dealers they chose to try to move them. In any case, I think they sold out, which would be nice. So a 22 would be nice. You know, a couple more sizes, especially a 22. I would say definitely a 22, and I would also say definitely a pair of 15-inch sound edge hats, because sound edge hats, and of course the heavier version. So they have a thin version, a heavy version of everything. Maybe not so much the hats, but definitely the 18s and the 20s and the 24s, especially the 24s. There's not a lot of ping there. Not that everybody likes it, but a 15-inch pair of sound edge hats would be terrific. Because if not everybody realizes, the original sound edge hats they made were, of course, Formula 602 sound edge hats. In the late 60s, 1967, I think, was like sound edge, the big thing, you know. And sound edge hats were just Formula 602. In 2000, or sorry, in 1971, when the 2002s came out, they offered them in the, of course, the 2002 line. And then after that, all the other lines that came up, 404 and 505 and Sound Creation. Of course, subsequently they made Sound Edge hats. But something that's overlooked in Sound Edge is the original Sound Edge hats, which were Formula 602s, were very thin, kind of delicate cymbals with lathing identical to Giant Beats. In fact, I think that they probably got the idea for the lathing of Giant Beats. They probably just used the lathing that they used on the Sound Edge hats, which, by the way, I think the lathing on the Sound Edge 602 hats came from the Joe Morello. They had a thing called the Paiste 7 sound set, which had like there was a China, there were hi-hats, I think there was like a flat ride, and then maybe like an 18-inch bright medium or something. They all had real fine lathing, or most of them did, because at one time or another I had each one of the cymbals. Maybe except for, I don't know if I ever had the hats. But I know I had the China, I know I had the 18, I think there was a 20 and a 2. Anyway, I think that's where the lathing came from. And then, of course, that they use that lathing here on the Giant Beats, which I think makes for longer sustain and stuff. Anyway, but I said to Ed Clift, I said, well, if you guys, 22 would be great, or, especially a 15-inch pair of hats. And my idea wasn't just simply like, obviously I'm a bottom nut. It's not like, well, I love 15-inch hats because I'm a bottom nut and I want Sound Edge. Well, the reason, it's actually, I think, a little deeper than that, or I think at least as far as Paiste is concerned. Again, the original Formula 602 Sound Edges were a very thin, delicate cymbal. And they had a great sound when you close it with the foot, it'd be like, tss, and they had a nice, crisp, but not heavy sound. And if they were to issue Giant Beats as Sound Edge in the current format, the 15-inch, I would say that the 15-inch current Giant Beats that they reissued are definitely heavier. The top cymbal, I think, is heavier. Not by much, but heavier than a original 15-inch 602 top. And I'm not necessarily saying they should make the Giant Beat top thinner. I'm saying whatever. But if they did offer a Sound Edge bottom with the current top, I think it would very much mimic a B8 version of the 602 B20 alloy Sound Edge hats. And I would say 15 because I think that actually that Sound Edge hats actually, out of 13, 14, and 15, in my opinion, 14 and 15 sound the best. There's some kind of dinky sound in about 13-inch sound. But then again, that's all subjective. But 15s are popular, not just because of bottom, but if you look through the old Paiste catalogs, you'll see a lot of guys played 15-inch hats back then. A lot of guys played 15-inch Sound Edge, either 602 or 2002 hats. It wasn't just, you saw even Phil Collins did it, So, in any case, I think that would be a great idea for Paiste to do. And and I even suggested to Ed, he was rolling his eyes at this point, as I'm sure you are now. I said, I said, forget it. Don't even make a Giant Beat Sound Edge bottom. I said, just at the factory, offer a pair, kind of like Zildjian did with the KZs. Say, all right, here's this Giant Beat top with a 2002 Sound Edge bottom. People, of course, can do it manually. You can order from Midwest Percussion or whatever, a 15-inch Giant Beat top and a 2002 Sound Edge bottom. But, I think it's a little more expensive if you do it a la carte that way. Also, too, there'd be something just really cool about getting it from the factory that way. The factory could match it up or whatever. And I think they'd sell like hotcakes, and I think they'd sound terrific. So, but anyway, back to the sound of these particular cymbals. I think the reissues generally are better. It's not to say, I'm sure if I was able to snap my fingers to get the 18 or so cymbals that I've had, the actual Giant Beats, there might be one of the 20s I think might sound a little better than this. I'm talking about sonically, not, put aside for the weight. You know what I mean? If I could, you went in the ballpark, you'd like them to be the exact same weight, because you'd really want to try to get the exact same sound. Yeah, I think that they, these reissues, or, the reissue Giant Beats are just great. Like I said, I wish they'd offer a slightly heavier version. And again, here we are with the sound. So, there's that ring again. Here it is. That's the original. Reissue. I'd have to go with the reissues. In any case, what else was I going to mention about these, though? Again, some of the stores are blowing these out on eBay. there's two. I'd probably rather not say the names, but there's two companies that are selling, you know, the 20s, the 20 reissues, like $208 shipped to your door. A couple other places are selling maybe for a little bit more. The 18s I think are going for like $184 shipped to your door. The Giant Beat hats are going for like $269 shipped to your door. The 15s, the 24 I think is going for like $269. And those are crazy cheap prices on these things. I don't know if they're blowing them out because they're. I mean, I don't know. And they're selling them as used. But take it from me, they're not used. I think they just do that. Maybe they're just doing that to get around the price. You know what I mean? Like it's used, but just so they can go below the price. I don't know how they're doing it. Maybe I shouldn't have said it. Oops. But I mean, this thing came to me brand new in the factory bag, and I talked to other folks who got them from these places. They're brand new. They're not a mark on them. So again, original, bigger bell, more of a brown color compared to the reissues, which are sort of a brownish green, sort of an olivey brownish green. Reissues more brown. If you want to look for an original Giant Beat, chances are if it's a white label, the ink will be gone. Look at the 3 o'clock position. If you see any Paiste stamp at the 3 o'clock position, you can bet it's a Giant Beat. And again, about 70 or 71, they switched the inking to look. That's where, of course, they got this idea. The reissue came from the later version of the Giant Beat. That's a Paiste Giant Beat up here. And of course, if they're black label, odds are you'll see a serial number on them. As late as 1974, apparently. Thanks, dude, for sending me those pictures. Because, like I said, I'd only seen up to 73. And he sent me the other day, or a couple weeks ago, pictures from 74. And that's just pretty much it. And also, too, I think I said before that there was a time they did change the stamp a little. The Paiste then went up here. And then that later stamp they put on the sound creations, the 70s sound creations. So, again, from my experience, the sound creations, if they do have this stamp, it won't say sound creation on it. But if you see the stamp up here and the ink is gone, odds are it's a sound creation. See the stamp over here, and it's a B8 alloy, because the sound creations are B20. Giant Beats are B8. If you see a stamp here on a Paiste symbol, it looks like this, 3 o'clock, it's a Giant Beat, an original. So, that's it. And this is a darn good cymbal. I mean, this is, again, is a great sounding cymbal. It's just, just in general, even accounting for the slight weight differential, I just prefer the reissue. So, again, if anybody has any more questions on some Zeppelin stuff, just let me know, and I'll do my best to try and work it out for you. And there was something else I was going to say. I forget now. I don't know. Oh, and if anybody wants my CD, which of course is not me playing Bonham stuff, it's my own stuff, just shoot me an email and I can put them on eBay and sell it to you for like $5 or something. But in any case, I'm glad you like the cymbals. I'm glad you're Paiste fans like I am. And I'm just glad I made this version of the video just down to about a half hour instead of the 2-hour one I made earlier today. Thanks, guys. Bye.